Ladies and gentlemen, throughout history, there have been battles that have shaped nations, defined cultures, and altered the course of civilization itself. One such battle took place in the year 490 BC, a clash between two vastly different worlds. On one side stood the Persian Empire, the most powerful force of its time, stretching from the Indus Valley in the east to the edges of Europe in the west. On the other side stood the city-state of Athens, a relatively small but fiercely independent power, joined by its ally, Plataea. This confrontation, known as the Battle of Marathon, was not just a military engagement. It was a defining moment in the struggle between oppression and freedom, between empire and democracy. To understand the significance of the Battle of Marathon, we must first look at the greater conflict between Persia and Greece. The Persian Empire, under the rule of King Darius I, had already expanded its dominion over many regions, bringing countless people under its rule. Persia was a vast and efficient empire, with a highly organized military, a vast network of roads, and an army that included warriors from many different cultures. They had wealth, numbers, and a ruler determined to bring Greece under his control. But Greece was not like the other territories Persia had conquered. Unlike the vast and centralized Persian Empire, Greece was made up of independent city-states, each with its own government, customs, and way of life. Among them, Athens had begun developing a system of government unlike anything seen before: democracy. It was a fragile yet revolutionary idea, the people governing themselves, making decisions through debate and discussion rather than the decrees of a king. To the Persians, this was a challenge to their authority, an insult to their empire's dominance. And so, the Persian invasion of Greece was not just a military campaign. It was an attempt to extinguish a political experiment that would later influence the foundations of Western civilization. The road to Marathon began years earlier when the city-states of Ionia, Greek settlements on the coast of modern-day Turkey, rebelled against Persian rule. Though the rebellion was crushed, Athens had supported the Ionian cause, earning the wrath of Darius. He vowed to punish Athens for interfering in Persian affairs. In 490 BCE, he sent a fleet across the Aegean Sea with the goal of subjugating Athens and demonstrating Persian might. The Persian army, tens of thousands strong, landed on the plains of Marathon, just 26 miles from Athens. Their goal was clear: march on the city, crush its defenses, and make an example of it. Athens had no standing army capable of matching Persia in sheer numbers. Yet, rather than surrender or wait for inevitable destruction, the Athenians chose to fight. They called upon their neighboring city-states for aid, but only Plataea responded, sending a small force to join them. The Spartans, known as the greatest warriors of Greece, were unable to come due to a religious festival, leaving Athens to stand alone. The fate of their city, and perhaps the future of Greece itself, rested on the shoulders of a few thousand citizen soldiers. Despite the overwhelming odds, these warriors did not despair. The Athenians and Plataeans, though small in number, were well-trained and highly disciplined. They were not professional soldiers, but farmers, craftsmen, and merchants who had taken up arms to defend their homeland. Yet they had something that the Persians did not: a deep, personal stake in the outcome of this battle. They were not fighting for a king or an empire. They were fighting for their families, their freedom, and their way of life. As they stood on the fields of Marathon, looking upon the vast Persian army before them, they knew that the battle to come would not just decide the fate of their city, but could determine the future of Greece itself. Would their young democracy survive, or would they fall under the rule of a foreign empire? Would their culture, their traditions, and their ideals be preserved, or would they be lost to history? To understand why the Battle of Marathon happened, we must look at the broader ambitions of the Persian Empire and the growing tension between Persia and the Greek city-states. At the time, Persia was the most powerful empire the world had ever seen. Under King Darius I, the empire stretched from the Indus Valley in the east to Egypt and the Balkans in the west. It was a vast and sophisticated civilization, boasting a well-organized administration, a formidable army, and a network of roads that connected distant lands. Persia had absorbed countless nations into its fold, and now its eyes were set on Greece. The conflict between Persia and Greece had its roots in an earlier event, the Ionian Revolt, 499 to 494 BCE. The Ionian city-states, Greek settlements on the coast of modern-day Turkey, had been under Persian rule for years. However, they resented Persian domination and longed for the independence that their fellow Greeks in mainland Greece enjoyed. In 499 BCE, they rebelled against Persia, seeking to overthrow their foreign rulers. But the Ionians could not fight the mighty Persian Empire alone. They needed allies. They turned to their fellow Greeks, and Athens responded. Eager to challenge Persian influence, the Athenians sent ships and soldiers to aid the Ionian revolt. Together, the rebels managed to burn Sardis, a key Persian city. But their victory was short-lived. The Persians retaliated with overwhelming force, crushing the rebellion by 494 BCE. The Ionian revolt was over, but its consequences were far-reaching. King Darius I was furious. To him, Athens' involvement was an insult, a direct challenge to his authority. No city had the right to defy the great king and escape unpunished. Darius swore revenge. According to ancient accounts, he was so determined to punish Athens that he commanded one of his servants to whisper in his ear every day, "Master, remember the Athenians." Darius now had a personal mission to bring Athens to its knees and extend Persian control over all of Greece. But this was not just about vengeance. There were strategic reasons for Persia to expand into Greece. The Greek city-states were disunited, often at odds with one another. If Persia could conquer them, it would gain control over a region that was growing in influence and wealth. The Greek world was also a gateway to further expansion into Europe. For Darius, conquering Greece would cement Persia's dominance over the known world. In 492 BCE, Darius launched his first invasion of Greece. A Persian fleet, carrying thousands of soldiers, set out to conquer the northern regions of Greece. But fate intervened. A powerful storm wrecked much of the Persian fleet, forcing them to retreat. The invasion had failed, but Darius was undeterred. He began planning a second invasion, one that would strike directly at Athens. 2 years later, in 490 BCE, he was ready. This time, the Persian forces were well prepared. A vast army, consisting of warriors from all corners of the Persian Empire, Persians, Medes, Egyptians, and others, set sail across the Aegean Sea. Their goal is clear: land on Greek soil, crush Athens, and demonstrate the might of Persia. The Persians landed on the plains of Marathon, just 26 miles from Athens. Their army was immense, their reputation fearsome. To many, it seemed inevitable that Athens would fall, just as so many other cities had before it. But the Greeks were not ready to surrender. They knew that the Persian invasion was not just an attack on their city, it was an attack on their way of life. And so, against overwhelming odds, they prepared to stand their ground. As the Persian army landed on the shores of Marathon, the people of Athens faced a terrifying reality. A vast, disciplined force had arrived with a single goal: to destroy their city and bring them under Persian rule. The Athenians knew that surrender was not an option. If they yielded, Athens would be plundered, its people enslaved, and their hard-won freedom crushed beneath the weight of the Persian Empire. But standing against such a mighty force seemed almost impossible. Athens was not a military superpower like Sparta, nor did it have the resources of the Persian Empire. It was a city-state that had only recently begun to experiment with democracy, a radical system of government in which citizens had a say in their own affairs. This was a stark contrast to Persia, where the great king ruled with absolute authority. The Athenians had a way of life worth defending, and they knew that if they allowed Persia to conquer them, their freedoms would be lost. The Athenians had a difficult decision to make. Their army was far smaller than the Persian force. They had no walls around their city that could withstand a siege. Their navy was not strong enough to repel the Persian fleet. Their only option was to fight, and fight in a way that would give them a chance at victory. Recognizing the urgency of the situation, Athens sent a message to Sparta, the most powerful military state in Greece, requesting immediate assistance. The message was carried by Phidippides, a professional runner who covered the nearly 150-mile distance between Athens and Sparta in just 2 days. Upon arriving, he delivered the desperate plea, "Come to our aid, for Athens stands alone against Persia." The Spartans acknowledged the threat, but were unable to send help immediately. They were in the midst of a religious festival, the Carnea, during which their laws forbade them from marching to war until the festival ended. They promised to come, but only after their sacred observances were complete. This delay meant that Athens could not rely on their strongest ally in the crucial opening days of the battle. With no reinforcements coming from Sparta, Athens had to act quickly. They turned to their closest ally, the small city-state of Plataea. Though tiny in comparison to Athens, Plataea did not hesitate. They sent a force of around 1,000 warriors to stand alongside the Athenians. This was a remarkable gesture, considering the size of Plataea's population. It was not just a military alliance, it was a statement of unity, a declaration that they would not allow their Greek way of life to be trampled under Persian rule. Together, the Athenian and Plataean forces numbered around 10,000 men, a fraction of the Persian army's size. Yet they did not waver. Under the command of General Miltiades, the Greek forces marched to Marathon to confront the enemy head-on. Their strategy would be critical. The Athenians knew that the Persians relied on their superior numbers, archers, and cavalry. If the Greeks fought on open ground, they would be surrounded and cut down. If they stayed behind their city walls, they would be trapped in a siege. Instead, they chose to face the enemy on the battlefield, using tactics that would give them the best chance of success. With their shields and spears in hand, the citizen soldiers of Athens and Plataea prepared to make their stand. The fate of their city, and possibly all of Greece, rested on their courage and determination. As the Greek forces stood on the battlefield of Marathon, they faced a grim reality. Their army was vastly outnumbered. The Persian army, a massive force drawn from across the empire, was believed to be at least twice the size of the Greek contingent. Some historical estimates suggest the Persians had between 20,000 and 30,000 troops, while the combined Athenian and Plataean forces numbered only around 10,000. The sheer difference in numbers was staggering. On paper, the Greek forces had little chance of survival, let alone victory. But numbers alone do not determine the outcome of a battle. The Greeks knew that their survival depended on more than just size. It depended on their courage, discipline, and ability to use the terrain to their advantage. Unlike the Persian army, which consisted of troops from various regions of the empire, the Greek hoplites were fighting for their homeland. They were not professional soldiers. They were farmers, blacksmiths, merchants, and craftsmen who had taken up arms to defend their city and their families. Their motivation was not wealth or conquest, but the survival of their way of life. The Persian army was known for its deadly archers and swift cavalry, which had helped them dominate battles across Asia. The Greek hoplites, however, had something that the Persians did not, a heavily armored, disciplined infantry force that relied on close combat. The Greeks fought in a formation called the phalanx, a tight-knit, nearly impenetrable wall of shields and spears that required rigorous training and coordination. The Persians, on the other hand, primarily relied on light infantry, archers, and cavalry, which were more effective in open terrain but struggled against the disciplined formations of the Greek hoplites. But the Greeks had another advantage: knowledge of the battlefield. The terrain of Marathon was not ideal for the Persian cavalry. The marshlands and uneven ground made it difficult for horses to maneuver effectively, reducing one of Persia's greatest advantages. Miltiades, the Athenian general, understood this and used it to his benefit. He also knew that waiting for the Persians to attack would allow them to use their archers to weaken the Greek forces before engaging in direct combat. The Greeks could not afford to let this happen. Despite being heavily outnumbered, the Greek forces did not hesitate. They knew that retreat or hesitation would mean certain destruction. Their courage came from their belief in what they were fighting for: their freedom, their families, and their future. They had no empire to protect, no vast riches to defend, only their city and the ideals that made it unique. Unlike the Persian soldiers, many of whom were fighting because they were ordered to by their king, The Greek warriors fought because they chose to. As the Persian army prepared for battle, the Greeks steeled themselves for the fight ahead. They knew that victory was not just a possibility, it was a necessity. They had no reinforcements coming, no second chance if they failed. This was their moment to stand against the greatest empire the world had ever known, and they were ready to give everything to protect what was theirs. As the Greek forces prepared for battle, they knew that their best chance for survival and victory depended on their ability to fight as a unified force. The Persian army was vast, highly mobile, and skilled in long-range combat, particularly with its elite archers and swift cavalry. The Greeks, on the other hand, relied on an entirely different style of warfare, one that emphasized discipline, coordination, and sheer physical endurance. At the heart of their strategy was the phalanx formation, a battle tactic that would prove to be one of the most effective military formations in history. The phalanx was not just a way of fighting, it was a philosophy of unity and strength. Each Greek hoplite, a heavily armed infantry soldier, stood shoulder to shoulder with his comrades, forming a solid wall of overlapping shields and outward-pointing spears. This formation allowed the Greek warriors to move as a single, cohesive unit rather than individual fighters. Unlike the Persian army, which was composed of soldiers from many different cultures, each with different fighting styles, the Greek phalanx operated with precise discipline. Every man in the formation had to trust the warrior next to him, for his shield not only protected himself, but also partially covered the soldier to his left. The typical hoplite was equipped with a large round shield, aspes or hoplon, a bronze or iron helmet, a breastplate, greaves, shin guards, and a long spear, dori, which was the primary weapon. In close combat, if the spear broke, the hoplites would draw their short swords, xiphos, and continue the fight. Their armor was far heavier than that of the Persian infantry, which mostly wore light tunics and carried wicker shields. While this made Greek soldiers less mobile, it gave them a significant advantage in direct clashes. Miltiades, the Athenian general leading the Greek forces, understood that the Persians had one major weakness. They were not used to facing heavily armored infantry in tight formations. Persian warriors, particularly their archers, relied on weakening the enemy from a distance before engaging in hand-to-hand combat. But against a well-formed phalanx, their arrows had limited effect. The Greek hoplites, with their shields locked together, could withstand the barrage of missiles and advance steadily toward the enemy lines. The genius of the Greek strategy at Marathon lay not just in using the phalanx, but in how it was deployed. Normally, a phalanx was strongest at its center, where the most elite warriors were positioned. However, Miltiades deliberately weakened the center of his formation and strengthened the flanks, creating a deceptive strategy. He anticipated that the Persians, seeing the weaker center, would push forward aggressively. As the Persian center advanced, the stronger Greek wings would wrap around them, surrounding and crushing them from both sides. This tactical maneuver was a risky but brilliant decision. It required immense discipline and coordination, as every soldier had to execute their part of the plan flawlessly. The Greeks could not afford disorder in their ranks. Any disruption in the phalanx could create gaps that the Persians would exploit. But these were not ordinary soldiers. They were citizens fighting for their homeland, trained from youth in the art of war. Each warrior understood that breaking formation meant not only his own death, but the potential downfall of Athens itself. As the Greek forces began their charge, they moved with remarkable speed and precision. Their battle cries filled the air, their shields locked together as one, and their spears poised for the deadly clash ahead. The Persian archers fired wave after wave of arrows, hoping to weaken the Greek lines before the two sides met. But the phalanx formation held firm, its shield wall absorbing the impact as the warriors pressed forward. This was the moment that would determine the fate of the battle. Would the Persian forces break the Greek line, or would the phalanx prove to be an unbreakable force against the might of the empire? The tension on the battlefield was palpable. Two armies stood face to face. The mighty Persian force, with its vast numbers and diverse warriors drawn from across the empire, and the disciplined Greek hoplites, fewer in number but fiercely determined. The fate of Athens, and perhaps all of Greece, hung in the balance. Then the moment came. The Greek forces, under the leadership of Miltiades, charged toward the enemy. This was not a slow, cautious advance. The Athenians and Plataeans rushed forward at a full sprint, an almost unthinkable tactic for heavily armored hoplites. The distance between the two armies was about a mile, and the Greeks covered this ground quickly, closing the gap before the Persian archers could inflict heavy casualties. Normally, an army would advance at a steady pace, but Miltiades knew that time was against them. The longer they waited, the more the Persian archers could weaken their ranks. By charging headlong, the Greeks minimized their exposure to enemy fire and increased their momentum for the clash. The Persians, watching the Greeks sprint toward them in perfect formation, were taken aback. They were accustomed to facing disorganized enemies who either fled in fear or engaged in chaotic, uncoordinated fighting. But the Greeks were different. Their charge was not reckless. It was controlled, disciplined, and relentless. As the Greeks closed in, the Persian archers released a deadly volley of arrows. A rain of sharp, iron-tipped missiles darkened the sky, falling upon the charging hoplites. Many Greek warriors were struck, some falling before they could reach the enemy lines. But the phalanx formation held. The shields absorbed much of the damage, and the remaining warriors pressed forward, undeterred. Then, the moment of impact arrived. The Greek hoplites slammed into the Persian front lines with an immense force, their heavy shields crashing against the lightly armored Persian infantry. The Persians, who relied on mobility and archery, were not prepared for such a brutal, direct confrontation. The sheer weight and discipline of the Greek phalanx overwhelmed the Persian foot soldiers, pushing them backward and disrupting their formations. The fighting was intense, chaotic, and bloody. The Greeks, using their long spears, thrust forward with precise and powerful strikes, targeting the lightly protected torsos and faces of the Persian warriors. The Persians, armed with shorter swords and wicker shields, struggled to counter the well-armored hoplites. Their advantage in numbers was quickly becoming meaningless in the confined space of the battlefield. The Persians tried to regroup, relying on their superior mobility to counter the Greeks' slow but steady advance. However, the terrain of Marathon worked against them. The marshy areas and uneven ground limited the effectiveness of their cavalry, preventing them from executing the swift flanking maneuvers that had won them battles elsewhere. Without cavalry support, the Persian infantry was forced into brutal, close-quarters combat, an area where the Greeks excelled. As the battle raged on, the Persian commanders desperately sought to turn the tide. They pushed their troops forward, trying to break the Greek line through sheer force of numbers. The Greek center, which had been deliberately weakened by Miltiades as part of his strategy, began to feel the pressure. The Persians managed to push back the Greek center, creating a bulge in the formation. It seemed, for a moment, as if the Persians might break through. But this was exactly what Miltiades had planned. The stronger Greek flanks, positioned on the left and right, held firm while the Persian forces surged forward in the center. Then, in a perfectly executed maneuver, the Greek wings curved inward, trapping the advancing Persians in a deadly pincer movement. The invaders, now surrounded on three sides, found themselves with nowhere to retreat. The battlefield of Marathon was now a scene of utter chaos. Shields clashing, swords slashing, war cries filling the air. Blood soaked the earth as the Greeks pressed their advantage, driving the Persians backward. The mighty empire that had conquered so many lands was now on the defensive, struggling to hold its ground against a far smaller but determined enemy. The battle was reaching its climax, but the outcome was still uncertain. Would the Greek flanks be able to complete the encirclement, or would the Persians manage to break free and regroup? The fate of the battle, and perhaps of Greece itself, was hanging by a thread. As the Battle of Marathon raged on, the Greek phalanx proved to be an unbreakable wall against the Persian onslaught. Despite being outnumbered, the Athenians and Plataeans fought with relentless determination. The Persians, accustomed to using their superior numbers and archers to weaken their enemies before engaging in melee combat, were completely unprepared for the disciplined and aggressive assault of the Greek hoplites. At first, it seemed that the sheer weight of the Persian army might overwhelm the Greeks. The center of the Greek line, deliberately weakened by Miltiades' strategy, had been pushed back under the pressure of Persian forces. The Persians, sensing an opportunity, surged forward, believing that victory was within their grasp. They pressed harder, attempting to break through the Athenian defenses and scatter the Greek army. But Miltiades had planned for this exact moment. While the Persians focused their efforts on crushing the Greek center, the Athenian and Plataean hoplites on the flanks held firm. Their lines did not break, their shields remained locked together, and their spears continued to strike down Persian soldiers with ruthless efficiency. Unlike the lightly armored Persian infantry, who relied on speed and mobility, the Greek warriors were built for endurance and strength in close combat. Then, at the perfect moment, Miltiades gave the order to counterattack. The weakened Greek center, which had been giving ground, suddenly stopped retreating and stood firm. Simultaneously, the two Greek wings, which had remained strong, pivoted inward, closing in on the Persian army from both sides. This was a classic double envelopment maneuver, one of the most effective battlefield tactics ever devised. The effect was immediate and devastating. The Persian soldiers who had pushed forward into the Greek center suddenly found themselves surrounded on three sides. The once confident invaders were now trapped, unable to escape as the Greek warriors pressed in from the left and right. The disciplined hoplites advanced with deadly precision, thrusting their spears into the tightly packed Persian ranks. The Persian army, known for its speed and mobility, was now at a severe disadvantage. Their light armor offered little protection against the relentless Greek assault. Panic began to spread through the Persian ranks. The battlefield turned into a nightmare for the invaders. The Greeks, fueled by the knowledge that they were fighting for their homeland, showed no mercy. The Persian soldiers, unable to maneuver or retreat, were cut down in massive numbers. Their commanders shouted orders, trying to restore order, but it was too late. The once mighty Persian army was collapsing under the weight of the Greek counterattack. The chaos of battle only grew worse for the Persians as their formations crumbled. Soldiers at the rear, realizing they were surrounded, began to flee toward the ships, desperate to escape the slaughter. Those at the front were trapped, unable to break free from the crushing force of the Greek hoplites. The Persian cavalry, which could have been a game-changer, had been largely neutralized due to the terrain and the swiftness of the Greek assault. The Greeks did not let up. Their warriors fought with unmatched ferocity, knowing that a single moment of hesitation could turn the tide of battle once more. The Persians, for all their might, were now in full retreat. But the Athenians and Plataeans had no intention of letting them escape so easily. The battle was reaching its decisive moment. The Greeks had turned the tide, but complete victory was still within reach. The Greek counterattack crushed the Persian center and closed in from both flanks. The once confident invaders found themselves in complete disarray. The battlefield, which had moments ago been filled with the clash of weapons and the shouts of soldiers, was now turning into a scene of sheer chaos. The Persian army, trapped and unable to effectively fight back against the disciplined Greek phalanx, had only one choice left: retreat to their ships. What had begun as an overwhelming invasion force was now a panicked and scattered mass of warriors scrambling to escape the Greek assault. The Persians, accustomed to fighting on their own terms, had never faced such a disciplined and well-coordinated enemy. Their light infantry, which relied on speed and agility, was useless against the unyielding force of the hoplites. Their cavalry had been rendered ineffective by the terrain. Their archers, once deadly from a distance, had been unable to stop the relentless Greek advance. Now, their only hope of survival lay in reaching their ships and fleeing across the Aegean. The Persian soldiers broke ranks and ran toward the shoreline, abandoning weapons and armor in their desperate bid to escape. But the Greeks, emboldened by their success, were determined not to let them go unpunished. The Athenian and Plataean warriors pursued the retreating Persians relentlessly, cutting down those who could not escape fast enough. The once mighty army of the Persian king was now a terrified mass of men, trampling over each other in their rush to reach the safety of their fleet. Some tried to swim out to the departing ships, only to drown in the waters of the bay. Others were crushed by the stampede of their own comrades. The Greeks, knowing that a decisive victory required eliminating as many of the enemy as possible, pressed forward aggressively. The battlefield of Marathon stretched down to the coast, and the final phase of the battle took place on the beaches where the Persian fleet was anchored. Greek warriors, fueled by adrenaline and the knowledge that they had defended their homeland, stormed toward the Persian ships, hacking down any soldier who stood in their way. The retreating Persians, desperate to escape, began pushing their comrades aside, some even trampling over the bodies of their own fallen warriors. The Greek pursuit was relentless, and what had started as a battle had now become a massacre. Persian officers screamed orders, trying to restore some semblance of order, but the fear of death was stronger than any command. At the shoreline, the final moments of the battle were the most brutal. The Persians tried to board their ships under a hail of Greek spears and swords. Some managed to climb aboard and push off from the shore, but many were cut down before they could escape. The Greeks even attempted to seize some of the Persian ships, engaging in fierce struggles on the decks as they tried to prevent the enemy's retreat. Despite their best efforts, some Persian vessels successfully departed, carrying what remained of the shattered invasion force back toward their homeland. The Greek warriors, standing victorious on the beach, watched as their defeated enemies fled across the sea, their dreams of conquest shattered. But even as the Persians sailed away, the Greeks knew that their work was not yet finished. The battle may have been won, but the threat was not yet over. As the last of the Persian ships disappeared over the horizon, the battlefield of Marathon fell eerily silent. The dust of battle still hung in the air, mingling with the scent of sweat, blood, and death. The once proud Persian army had been utterly routed, their dream of conquering Athens shattered by the sheer determination and discipline of the Greek hoplites. The Athenian and Plataean warriors stood victorious, their shields dented, their spears broken, but their spirit unyielding. The cost of this victory, however, was undeniable. The ground was littered with the bodies of the fallen, both Persian and Greek. The Persian dead lay in vast numbers, a grim testament to the effectiveness of the Greek phalanx and the devastating counterattack that had turned the tide of battle. Some historians estimate that around 6,400 Persian soldiers were slain that day, their bodies left behind in the fields and marshes of Marathon as their comrades fled across the Aegean. The Greek losses, though significantly smaller, were still deeply felt. 192 Athenian warriors had perished in the battle, along with an unknown number of Plataeans. Though their casualties were minimal compared to those of the Persians, every loss was a heavy blow to the small city-state of Athens. Each fallen warrior was a father, a son, or a brother, a citizen who had laid down his life not as a professional soldier, but as a defender of his homeland. In the immediate aftermath, the Greeks moved swiftly to secure the battlefield. The Persian dead were left where they had fallen, a stark reminder of their failed invasion. The Greek warriors, however, were honored in death. The Athenians and Plataeans gathered the bodies of their fallen comrades and constructed a great burial mound, a tumulus, that would serve as a lasting memorial to their sacrifice. Even today, this mound at Marathon stands as a testament to their courage and valor. Despite their exhaustion and grief, the Greek warriors had no time to rest. Word had reached them that the Persian fleet, though defeated at Marathon, had not abandoned their campaign entirely. The Persians, still seeking to strike a final blow against Athens, were sailing around Cape Saunion, hoping to reach the city before the victorious Greek army could return. Realizing the urgency of the situation, the Athenian hoplites made an incredible decision. They would march back to Athens immediately. Without rest, without delay, and after a grueling battle, the warriors set off on a forced march of nearly 26 miles, determined to defend their city against any further Persian assault. Their bodies were battered, their muscles aching, but their resolve remained unshaken. The same men who had just repelled the most powerful empire in the world now embarked on another journey, one that would cement their legacy in history. The battlefield of Marathon, now quiet, bore witness to the triumph of a free people against a mighty empire. But even in victory, the Greeks knew that this war was far from over. The Persians had been driven back for now, but their ambition had not been extinguished. Athens had won the day, but would it be enough to keep the Persian Empire at bay forever? The Battle of Marathon was not just a clash between two armies, it was a moment that would shape the course of history. This battle was more than a military victory. It was a triumph of a small, independent people against one of the greatest empires the world had ever seen. It proved that courage, strategy, and unity could overcome even the most overwhelming odds. But more importantly, it ensured the survival of Athens and its ideals, which would go on to influence the very foundations of Western civilization. The immediate impact of the victory at Marathon was profound. Athens had faced annihilation, and yet, against all expectations, it had emerged victorious. The Persians had come with the intention of punishing Athens for its support of the Ionian revolt, but instead, they had been humbled. This victory filled the Athenians with a newfound confidence in their political system, their military, and their ability to stand against tyranny. It was the first major proof that a citizen-led army, fighting not for conquest but for the defense of their homeland, could defeat a professional imperial force. One of the most lasting impacts of Marathon was the boost it gave to Athenian democracy. At the time, democracy in Athens was still young and fragile, only recently established by the reforms of Cleisthenes. Had the Persians won, this experiment in self-governance would likely have been destroyed, replaced by Persian rule and a system of tyranny. But the victory at Marathon proved to the Athenians that their system was worth defending. The idea that ordinary citizens, not kings or aristocrats, could govern themselves and defend their own freedom took deep root in the Greek world. This belief would later inspire the Golden Age of Athens, during which philosophy, science, literature, and art would flourish, laying the groundwork for Western thought. The battle also cemented the importance of the hoplite warrior and the phalanx formation in Greek military doctrine. The disciplined, well-trained citizen soldiers had proven superior to the more lightly armored, professional troops of the Persian Empire. This model of warfare would continue to dominate Greek and later Roman military strategies for centuries. The idea that a well-organized and united force could stand against a numerically superior enemy became a core principle of Western military thought. Additionally, Marathon inspired future generations of Greeks to resist Persian expansion. The Persian king Darius I, though defeated at Marathon, was determined to return with an even larger force. His successor, Xerxes I, would launch the full-scale Persian invasion of Greece a decade later. But the memory of Marathon gave the Greeks the belief that they could resist. When Xerxes' army arrived, vastly outnumbering the Greek defenders, the spirit of resistance born at Marathon played a crucial role in the battles of Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea, where the Greeks ultimately repelled the Persian invasion once and for all. Beyond Greece, the significance of Marathon stretched far into the future. Had the Persians won and Athens fallen, the development of democracy, philosophy, and classical art might have been stifled. Instead, Athens would go on to produce some of the greatest thinkers of all time, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, whose ideas continue to shape the modern world. Concepts such as political freedom, civic duty, and individual rights, which originated in ancient Greece, form the backbone of modern democratic societies. Even today, the legacy of Marathon endures. The word marathon itself has become synonymous with endurance and perseverance, a tribute to the legendary run of the Greek messenger Phidippides, who is said to have raced from the battlefield to Athens to announce the victory before collapsing from exhaustion. This act of heroism is commemorated in the modern marathon race, a symbol of human determination and resilience. The Battle of Marathon was not just a military victory, it was the moment when a fledgling democracy proved its strength against the might of an empire. It was the first time in recorded history that a free people had successfully defended their homeland against a foreign invasion, and in doing so, they set a precedent that would echo through the centuries.